that, I also wanted to just, I wanted to have a extension of myself, essentially, to have almost as like a thank you, I guess, for the experiences that this platform has given me. I genuinely owe so much of my life and my current like healthier mental state to VRChat, and so this is sort of like me like saying thank you. I have this back. I hope I can make someone feel as welcome as I felt when I first came here.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Sweet Talking Podcast, episode 57, with me, your host, Nepherti. I really appreciate you tuning in to today's episode, whenever you may be watching this on YouTube. So thank you all so much for supporting my content. Every view, every like, every comment definitely makes all the difference when you're trying to get something like this off the ground, and it's very much a labor of love. So really do appreciate all of you who are tuning in live as well as on YouTube. But before we get started talking about our guest, I do want to quickly also thank my supporters, not just on YouTube, but also people who have been supporting me on Patreon, which essentially helps fund what I'm doing here on YouTube, since pretty much all of my content gets demonetized because of various reasons, usually music. I try to choose music for the podcast that are pretty good, but everything else just gets axed by YouTube. So I really appreciate your support there on patreon.com/Nepherti, and I do want to especially thank my Huggle, Snuggle, and Uwu tier members. You all have been instrumental in keeping everything very much alive, so keeping me motivated to continue to do what I do. So I'm genuinely very thankful to each and every one of you for doing that and helping me out in that way. But I don't want to spend all the time talking about that, so we're going to go ahead and move on from that. Thank you all again for your assistance, and check that out if that's something you're interested in looking into. We'll talk about it again at the end of the podcast. So, with that out the way, let's go ahead and jump into talking about and meeting our guest for tonight's podcast, which is none other than SushiFerret. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. I really do appreciate you taking the time to hang out with me tonight and basically make this, continue to, collab with me or talk with me. Because we actually had a pretty good conversation when we first met. Like, I think it was at Deep Dive about like a month ago. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
it was at Deep Dive. I remember we had a pretty interesting conversation. You seemed like very friendly. You mentioned you had a podcast. I was like, oh, cool, hell yeah.
Yeah. I do try to like I try not to lead with like, oh, I do a podcast, but like when you're at these music events, like everyone is there for the music, and so like I'm not like a music producer myself, so like I always like I feel like, well, let's talk about you and let me learn more about you, and then perhaps I'll feel like more inclined to like if I feel comfortable enough, I'll like, oh well, yeah, I do this little thing on this little corner of the VRChat community that nobody ever sees because it's filled with all sorts of blurred thumbnails. So it's great. It's great. So I try to I try to be understanding and not be too forward about that. But thank you for being willing to join me and come on, because you obviously were very sweet to me too. So thank you.
Aw, thank you. It's good to be here.
Hell yeah. So I like to just kind of jump into things and just kind of ask my guest how they would basically how would they describe themselves? Like if someone who didn't know who you were at all asked who is SushiFerret, like how would you describe yourself to them?
Oh, well, I am a photographer, a DJ, and I host the VRChat music event Star Party. Those are my like three main things, I guess.
Okay. And which would you say is like the most active? Like what percentage for each activity do you think that you spend and dedicate a lot of time to?
That's a good question. It's probably between like Star Party and DJing. It's maybe lean towards Star Party, just because Star Party is like the most like consistent schedule, because we have like a set basis that we host events.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah. Okay. Nice. So, like, we'll talk about those aspects, your creative endeavors, very much. We'll definitely talk about that later on tonight. But I want to focus mainly on you as the individual. How did you come up with your name, SushiFerret? Like, what's the lore behind that?
So this is way back when Overwatch first came out. Me and some friends were playing it because it was this like fun new game that everyone was talking about. And I remember we had a guy on the enemy team who went by Crispy Salmon, and we all just found that username like very endearing. And it got me thinking, because I was looking for like a screen name change at the time anyways. My old one was like kind of painfully edgy. But I was like, I should do like a funky like food / like kind of animal themed username. And I was like, well, what's my favorite food? And I was like, probably sushi. And then what's my favorite animal? I really like ferrets. They're great. They're very wiggly. They're like nature's tube socks. Amazing. 10 out of 10. And so I was like, okay, SushiFerret.
So just a conglomeration of two of your favorite things. More or less.
Didn't expect for it to become like an artist name or anything like that, but it just kind of happened.
How long ago?
Let's see. I've been DJing for, I want to say 2 years-ish, maybe a little more.
Okay. So SushiFerret has basically existed for about 2 or so years, you'd say.
Yeah. SushiFerret is a name probably a little longer before the DJ thing, but they just sort of rolled into each other, I guess.
All right. Nice. And how did you how did you kind of decide on your look? Because I'm not sure if your particular look in VRChat is like something that you've created yourself, or if it's just a avatar that exists on the market.
So this base that I'm using is called Niwa. It's a booth model. I haven't really changed too much from it. I add like the glasses and like the color scheme and stuff, but it's largely like pretty close to like base Niwa, honestly. I remember when I was first looking for a VRChat model to just like use as my main thing. This was like ages ago. But I remember looking around and I don't know why, something just like stuck out with this one. It looked like she looks very friendly. She like has a sort of like unique style that looks a little bit more like, I guess, like stylized than like a lot of other like models that I was seeing at the time. And I also appreciated how like expressive she was, and it's very easy for me to just like make silly faces and everything whenever I'm talking with people. Like, I also really like that her like default look is that she's always smiling. I always want to feel like I want to project like a very friendly, like welcoming presence to anyone. So having a face that's just like always happy to see you, I feel like kind of reflects the energy I want to put out into the world.
So I do like to ask about like how, like, I guess not exactly about VRChat specifically, but I'd like to kind of get a sense of like how did you end up, like, what were you doing before VRChat became a thing? So who were you as an individual before VRChat became a person, became a part of your equation or part of your life?
So before VRChat, like at least right before VRChat, it was the pandemic, which is a very common answer, I feel like. But at the time, it was like peak pandemic. I wasn't really going outside except to maybe like go on some walks or hikes or something, but I wasn't really interacting with people. My work was remote as well, so all the human interaction I was getting was basically just like social media and Discord, or I guess maybe like a cashier at the grocery store, maybe. But yeah, it was me just sort of like alone with my thoughts, and I also through that started to realize that, oh shit, I might be trans too. So right before VRChat, I was like a very isolated and like baby trans, like just about to come out, or like having just come out.
How would you best describe your appreciation for photography, and how do you use that as a means of self-expression, if at all?
The way I approach my photography is, do you ever have like, okay, do you have like, you ever get this thing where like you look back on like a nice memory in your head and you view it in a very like picturesque, like sentimental way, like different than how you were experiencing it in real time? Like, let's say you hung out with a friend, and when you think back on it, you may put more focus on that funny joke your friend made, or that heart-to-heart moment you had together. Do you ever have anything like that?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's why I take pictures. Yeah, absolutely, to remember those moments. Yeah.
What I do, or at least what I aim to do with my photos, is I try to present those memories in the more like focused way of like how would I remember this? Like when I think back of like hanging out with a close friend, right? I'm not going to think of just like, you know, sitting across from someone and just staring at them point blank as we like chatted about whatever. I'm going to think about like, you know, their smile, the like how they looked like in the light, how they made me laugh, and I want to highlight those things, the things that made that special, and how it felt to me looking back in that moment.
Like you're trying to frame as much of the moment in its in all of its glory and meaning as well as you can in that photo.
Yeah, I think like some of the best photos when it comes to this are photos that can accurately portray how you were feeling in that moment, rather than just specifically like how it objectively looked. Like I can go to an event and just snap a photo and it will look fine, and just that will show me what that moment looked like. But an event of like, let's say me hugging the picture of, say, like me hugging a friend at the event, or my friend DJing and having like the time of their life like up on stage, I think those better highlight like what really made that night special. One moment, I'm taking a sip of my drink.
That's fair. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean that's how I like to approach photography as well. Like I wouldn't call myself a photographer, but like I do my best to really capture moments and as clearly and as like the importance of the moment. I try to capture as best as I can, because I think, you know, these moments in VRChat are very much real. They very much have weight. And I think when we think back on our lives, we're going to think back on this really wild experience called VRChat, and you know, who knows how far along, or if it'll still be around, you know, when we're like, you know, old. But I'd like to hope that it would be. But I do like the idea of being very conscientious about what it is that my photo is taking in the moment, so that, you know, the moment is captured very well. And yeah, so I completely agree with you, basically, is what I'm saying. So I definitely want to jump into the VRChat portion of tonight and kind of talk about how VRChat has made an impact on you. Let's kind of start at the beginning of things. How did you find out about VRChat, and how did you discover VRChat?
I found out about it through just random YouTube videos. I remember I first saw it via the the fucking Ugandan Knuckles meme, and I was like, this seems silly. And at the time, I didn't even have a VR headset, and this was like pre-pandemic too. I remember I like logged in very briefly just because I saw it was a free platform, and I got on and I was like, let's see if I can have like a funny random encounter. Why not? I'm free today. And I logged in. I think I like went to like a public drinking night or something, and I was like, oh, this is kind of wacky, but not really for me. And I signed off for the next 3-4 years or so until over the pandemic. I remember I was watching a lot of those VRChat like interviews of people where they would just talk about themselves and their story and everything. And that's what drew me in a little more, is like that ability to make a personal connection with someone and actually find like friendships over this platform.
Okay. Yeah. I definitely can agree with that. So it was just kind of a reframing of your perspective of VRChat. And like when pre-pandemic were you exposed to VRChat, and compared to when you actually jumped in? Just kind of give us a timeline briefly.
What year was Ugandan Knuckles again?
I'm not 100%, but I guess it's more 2017, 2018.
Yeah, I think that would be like my first ever exposure to it. And then my second exposure, the one that got me to like consistently keep going, was probably like 2020 or so.
Okay. And how if you don't mind me asking, how young were you? Because I know there are a lot of teenagers who discover VRChat. Like, were you already like in your 20s by then, or was it something that you kind of found out when you were like a teenager, and then you're like, I'll pass, kind of thing?
I was like early 20s when I first found out about it. When I started actually like consistently getting on, I was like mid 20s or so, I think.
Okay. So what is it about VRChat that I mean, you did mention that, you know, the idea of forming human connections was a good reason why you wanted to stay in VRChat, but over the time of you being here, what is it about VRChat that has kept you here? Since it's been, you know, about close to 5 years, if not around 5 years, since you've been here. Like, what keeps you here? Aside from the people, can't be the people, because I know that's gonna be like the main answer. So, what is it about VRChat that keeps you engaged? That essentially you believe in what they're doing enough to stay here?
I think, aside from the people, it is the creative freedom that exists here and the accessibility of that said creative freedom. Like, it's so easy for anyone to come in here and just, you know, start expressing themselves, learn Unity, get an avatar, or start customizing that avatar, start building worlds, start hosting events. Like, IRL, if I wanted to host Starting Party, for instance, it would be a lot more difficult for a variety of reasons, just not even counting the basic barriers that come with hosting a music event IRL that I'm sure anyone who is a, you know, event host can like swear by. Sorry, I had like a weird mental blank there.
No, you're good.
I think just how easy it is to express yourself here without like a lot of the normal barriers IRL is what draws me in a lot.
And when you first get into VRChat, like, in hindsight, just overall, like as your current form as SushiFerret in the community, you have the benefit of being already engaged in many communities. You have many connections. You've built many. You've known many creative people along the way. You've met a lot of creative people along the way. But how did that all start for you? Like, how were you? How did you go about even getting started with even discovering that spending time creatively in VRChat was something that you wanted to do, and how did you go about getting connected back in, let's say, 2020, 2021? Like, obviously that's before groups existed. So how did you kind of go about that, and what was your journey through VRChat, more or less?
So I think the point that started getting me like really into the mindset of, I want to actually like start expressing myself and doing something or creating something here was in the early days of the music scene on here. At the time, it was much smaller, of course. There weren't nearly as many resources available to find these events. It was mainly just word of mouth. But I remember I saw the video by Straz from way back in the day talking about like VRChat clubs, and I was like, that sounds cool as hell. I want to try. And something I started noticing immediately was just how passionate everyone was and how they were able to put together these amazing experiences just so easily compared to like how it could be done IRL. Like, I say easily, like in quotation marks, of course, but compared to the limitations you would have IRL, it was just very inspiring to see people use the tools that you're given in here to just create something genuinely beautiful and expressive purely out of like passion and love for the craft. And I was like, I want to do something like that too. Like, you spend enough time around people like that, it kind of inspires you, right?
Mm-hmm. So you watched the video from Straz, but I guess how did you eventually go about, meeting people? Like, did you just kind of start and you kind of organically met new people in the music scene? Because it can be very intimidating. It's like myself. Like, I'm not a music producer. I don't DJ, but I spend a lot of time in the music scene, and I think it'd be, for people who aren't really like organically a part of that, I think it can be really intimidating to kind of like connect with people. So how did you go about doing that and kind of establishing yourself as someone who's a part of the scene? I mean, the music scene.
I mean, for me personally, a lot of it was just like I would overhear a random conversation. They would say something that piqued my interest, and I would just hop in and join, which sounds like kind of weird at first. I feel like a lot of places IRL, like just going up and talking with someone can be kind of like weird depending on the place you're at. But I feel like VRChat has this unique culture of just, go say hi to that random person. Like, obviously don't bother someone if they obviously don't want to be bothered, but like, I feel like it's just a lot easier to approach people in here and just start talking and making friends. And it's intimidating at first, but after a while, you start to open up and become more outgoing. Like, I was very, very, very introverted before the VRChat music scene. Like, I would not be doing the sort of like live speaking to you on a podcast like back then. I would be like way too nervous.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, there are people who are in the scene who like perform and who are still very nervous and like talking on a podcast setting. But everyone has their own limitations and what they want to do, what they feel comfortable with, and that's totally understandable. But like you said, when people don't feel comfortable or don't feel like they want to be bothered, is there like a secret kind of way of knowing that a person doesn't want to be bothered, or like it's just something you kind of like just learn through trial and error?
Honestly, just kind of like feeling it out. I don't just like come up to random strangers and just be like, "Hi, I'm SushiFerret. Here's my life story." Like, I don't do that. It's normally just oh, this person, they were talking about a thing that sounds interesting. I'll go say hi, and then if it seems like they're kind of like, I'm like, "Oh, it's all right. I'll just like, I'll leave you be."
Hmm. Okay.
Like,
Okay.
I don't really. When it comes to socializing, I try to like at least do my best to pick up on how the other person is feeling, so I don't like overwhelm them or accidentally overstep my boundaries or make anyone uncomfortable. I know like random person coming up to you yapping can like throw a lot of people off.
Mm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like I always like to hear from like other people's perspectives how they process that sort of thing. There is such a thing as emotional intelligence to some degree, and just being acutely aware of other people's energy and how they may be feeling in the moment. I think it's a little bit easier to focus on that in VRChat because that's to some degree all that we have. All we have is really body language, tone of voice, if it applies, and also I guess body language also if it applies, and just kind of the general energy of what that person is putting off. So when it comes to just I guess existing in VRChat, like what is that like for you? Do you consider your place in VRChat as a singular, unique experience that is very much focused on Sushi as the individual? Or this is kind of a similar question to what I asked earlier. Is there kind of an overlap between how you exist here in VRChat and how you exist IRL? Do they exist individually from one another, or have they kind of coincided or crossed in any shape or form over the years that you've been active here?
I definitely say like over the years they have sort of melded together. I've met a lot of VR chatters like IRL at this point. Like, God, I can't even count how many people have seen me in person at this point. But even with that, like a VR chat friend of mine will go to a show in my city and we'll like go out partying together, and then maybe we meet some people there at that event, and it all just sort of like becomes one thing. Like, I know some people like to keep VR chat and IRL very, very separate, but for me, I've found it just sort of bleeding over into, these aren't just like my funky internet friends, these are just my friends,
And yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. Would you say that despite things being very much overlapping in both IRL and VRChat, would you still consider yourself or this existence a second life in its own right? Do you like? I'm not sure how much time you've spent in VRChat overall. I imagine it's quite a bit because you're a content creator to some degree, or event coordinator, we'll say. To what degree do you view VRChat as a second life, or perhaps a second home, if at all?
Honestly, I feel like VRChat is I don't really view it as like a second life anymore. I think when I first started, and at the start of my transition, it did feel sort of like a new start, but not a like separate thing running parallel to like my normal life. I think a big portion would definitely be like the community aspect of VRChat, like the music scene, for instance. Like IRL, I had always had like other queer friends that I could talk to, but I'd never been in a space where queer was like the majority, like where it was just the norm.
Why do you think that it is so easy for various LGBTQ communities, we'll say, to thrive in VRChat so easily? Why do you think that is? And what do you think is perhaps the cause of this seemingly hub of individuals who are creating really cool things, but living very queer existences? Why do you think VRChat has become that kind of place?
I think, as I'll just say, like, the current state of things here in the US progresses, it has become increasingly harder and harder to just be outwardly queer in public. And when that happens, I feel like we tend to look towards digital spaces instead. Even before VRChat was even a thing, we had message boards and TeamSpeak like setups where you could have like queer people interacting. And so I feel like the internet in general has always had this sort of like queer community on it, depending on where you go. And when VRChat came about, that same like subset of people on the internet, I feel like saw and was like, oh, I can actually like express myself here. That's another thing, is it can be very hard to express yourself as you want IRL, not just for queer people either, but just in general. I feel like struggling with self-expression is something that a lot of people can relate to overall. And so I think when you see something like VRChat, it's like, yeah, you can have the body you want, you can build the space that you want, you can have the community that you want. It just seems like a no-brainer to come to this place, especially if you are missing that sort of connection IRL.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can certainly agree with that. It's normal for people to want to gather where there are other people who are similar to you, who carry similar thoughts and similar values. Do you think the idea of self-expression and the freedom to do that is, I would say it would be a positive for most people, but due to the wide variety of people that we get here, especially in the last, I would say, the last 3, maybe 4 years now, how VRChat has had something of a boom of people who are just trying to waste time and just screw around and just kill time here, being able to it's drawn in a bunch of people who simply just want to like have a good time and not really do anything. They just want to enjoy themselves here. Do you think that helps or hinders VRChat in terms of like allowing like all people to express themselves in the way that they want to, but also potentially bring in people who are of the younger variety, we'll say? And that way of expressing themselves can oftentimes lead to very troublesome things in terms of, let's say, content creation, for example. Do you have any thoughts about that and just the wide variety of people that exist in VRChat, how they express themselves?
I think having that wide variety is overall a good thing. Like, I think the main issues we see arise, in my opinion, stem from more how those interactions are facilitated. Like, this is why I'm a fan of like the group system or like age verification, because it makes it easier for you to like find like-minded people and get talking with them. Or even if you are a stranger, it's easier for people to be like, oh, here's a person I see. I don't know them, but their group has like something that I'm interested in. Maybe I can talk with them. And yeah, there will always be like problems that arise, let's say. But I think there is more good done by having this sort of like wide influx of people than bad. I think right now it's just a question of, you have this big influx of people. Now you just need to manage it properly and carefully and make sure that people are given the tools they need to not only seek out community, but also to protect themselves and keep themselves safe.
Yeah, I would agree with you there for sure. With VRChat constantly growing and showing itself to be this very diverse platform, what is one thing about VRChat that you very much appreciate? Again, aside, like we'll say, like VRChat as an entity, not so much as VRChat the platform that we create on, but VRChat as the entity. What is one thing that you appreciate about what VRChat does as a company, we'll say, as a entity, and what is one thing that you wish could be improved on, or one thing that you don't particularly care for? That's again in relation to VRChat as a company itself.
Let's see. I think something that I really appreciate about VRChat, just like as a company, is their ability to interact with their community. Like, I'm sure you've seen this, like going around like the music scene and stuff. It's very common to run into developers and people who work at VRChat just being a part of the platform that they've like created. And I think that's something that's very important for any sort of like social platform or just content creator like geared platform. Like, if you've ever read talks between creators and like the executives at, say, like Twitter or like Facebook, or this is like pre-takeover Twitter, I guess.
Right.
But there is often this feeling of disconnect where it's like, are you sure we're using the same platform? Like, whereas on VRChat, I think having the team just regularly hang out here and experience for themselves, the communities that have grown here and how their own platform functions, I think is something that's very valuable to how they operate. As for something they can work on, I don't know. I'm sure there's something. Give me a second. I guess, like, I would like to see more accessible documentation for the platform. Oh, sorry, I moved a little bit.
No, you're good.
But I would like to see more accessible documentation. I understand that there is documentation out there. Like, they have like their own posts and like wiki and everything, and YouTube videos explain like how to optimize avatars and how to use the platform just in general. But I feel like it can still be a little overbearing for people who are fresh new to VRChat, have no idea what like Unity development is, etc. And it can be a little like intimidating. I feel like a more like hand-holdy, like, beginner like tutorials for stuff would be nice to see.
Yeah, I have heard that I tend to watch their streams when they stream on Fridays. So I have heard that they have a pretty dedicated wiki team, and I think they're very much encouraging people to, when they come up with new ideas, like for OSC and such, for them to contribute to the wiki. So I think they're really counting on the community to really bring out the documentation and to really like kind of compile all of the issues and all the things of how it all works and stuff. But I think I agree that better documentation would be great. But I thought I would just kind of mention that since it was brought up relatively recently in comparison to like when we were recording this. So probably like last week or so they mentioned about their wiki and such. Yeah, I agree. More accessible documentation that the layman can understand will only help to further community involvement and integrating better with the technologies that we have at our disposal. So regarding that, how do you how do you feel about the creator economy? What are your thoughts about the creator economy and how that is what that can be, and I guess where it is right now. And what are any thoughts or hopes about it?
Overall, I really enjoy it. I know there's a lot of concerns about, like, you don't want this to become like a walking microtransaction mobile game or something, and I'm sure inevitably, if not already, worlds like that will pop up or have popped up. But I think in general, it is a very smart move of them to have a internal method of keeping this platform funded that is, not just cycling through investor money, for instance. I would like to see some sort of like, let's see, how should I word this? I would like to see a little bit more focus just from the like user base side of things, not necessarily VRChat themselves, of how do we create a healthy culture around this creator economy? Like, how do we try and keep that sort of like microtransaction-y mindset to at least a minimum on the platform? And how do we, continue building our communities in a way where we can still express ourselves without having to worry about like a monetary aspect holding us back?
Yeah, it will come down to the developers talking with people in the community and gathering feedback from them to hopefully establish, let's say the rule set or the standards that can ultimately make as many people happy as possible. Because at the end of the day, you can't really please everybody. So that's obviously something that has to be, considered. What is the most optimal, ideal solution that can benefit the most amount of people? So, with that in mind, do you have any ideas of how it can be like implemented, or like or any thoughts of how you would want to implement it in your own endeavors?
That one's a little difficult, just because, I'm not a developer or anything. Like, I haven't worked at like a similar like social media like company or anything like that, so I can't really promise I can give like a good answer or good insight as to what is the correct way to go about this. I know, it needs to happen, obviously. Like, VRChat like does not run for free, so something like this does need to be implemented, but finding that balance is definitely a little tricky. Honestly, like, I feel like one of the biggest factors in developing a healthy culture around not just the creator economy, but just in general on VRChat, is how the community reacts to people doing stuff like this. Like, let's say your friend makes a world, right? And your friend adds in a bunch of like, not just like, transactions, but like really like predatory, like trying to take as much money from the user as possible, like the stereotypical like mobile game type of a microtransaction culture. Let's say your friend does that. If you just go, oh, that's cool, and like don't do anything, and none of their other friends like say anything about that, then it's like, okay, well, they're just going to keep doing it. And then the other people who also enjoy that are also going to keep doing it. But just a simple like, dude, this is lame, like a response from their friends, I feel like goes a long way. Like, I feel like people underestimate how powerful just having a friend go, hey, this is kind of shitty. How much influence that can have on someone, to have them just be like, you're right, I'll tone it down.
Yeah. That makes sense. I agree with that. Yeah. So I want, like, we were talking about like the creator economy and how important it is to create a cultural standard that the community can ultimately agree with, or at the very least, come to terms with to whatever degree they need to. And I have an interesting question. I think is pretty interesting. what do you think about, and how do you understand how the many unspoken rules of, interaction and VRChat, how did you learn those kind of unspoken rules, like the culture of VRChat, that we all kind of instinctively know, how to conduct ourselves and how to interact with other people? How did you go about learning those rules? I would imagine kind of in hindsight, to understanding yourself as a denizen of VRChat. How did you learn those rules? What are some of the rules that you think are like, what's one rule that you think is interesting or funny? And I guess how, like, in what way do you understand, like, the idea of, like, a group of people agreeing to follow these essentially unspoken rules that you have to basically learn, culturally speaking?
Right. Yeah, I think something that, and I can understand how people like make this mistake. I think something that a lot of new users kind of struggle to learn at first is coming to terms with the reality that you are holding like a physical space essentially when you are talking with people here. Like, it's easy to forget because, especially if you're interacting with this platform for the first time, it's at first easy to forget, like, oh yeah, that's a real person. Like, I feel like there's already this sort of disconnect with online games and social platforms in general, where the text box on your screen from the, let's say, like the enemy team in whatever PvP game you're playing, it's easy to forget, like, this isn't just a text box, that's like an actual person. And now here, that's not just an actual person, you are taking up space in front of them. So, like, if I were to, like, start randomly waving my hand in front of your face, that might bother you, because it would probably feel the same in person if I were to just start waving my hand in front of your face. And I think that's probably one of the first things that people need to pick up whenever they enter the VRChat space, is just accepting, like, oh, I have, like, a presence here, like a physical, quote-unquote physical presence. I'm not just, like, talking to a bunch of random people on Discord. Like, I can actually turn to them and make eye contact, or, like, have body language, and things like that. Or if I just stand in the corner and stare at someone, like, that they might get uncomfortable. They might be like, "Oh, why are you staring at me?" Like, it sounds so simple, like, when you talk about it, because when you think about it in real life, you're like, well, yeah, of course, like, that's how it works. But I feel like it was just that disconnect with VRChat and virtual spaces in general, where it's like, that is a real person you were talking to, and, there are still, like, social rules and boundaries that still apply here.
100%. Yeah. I had another question on hand that I wanted to run by you. Like, we'll just run with this one. Do you have phantom sense?
Slightly. Like, I don't know. I'm not like, if you whack me in the face, I'm not going to feel a sting or anything. But I can definitely, like, I feel a little fuzzy whenever someone, like, when they, like, grab my arm or something, or I can feel someone standing in front of me if they get really close. Like, I can get, like, claustrophobic in here, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. Yeah, like, not many people have it. It's definitely kind of a thing that you either have or you don't, and sometimes it could be trained depending on who you are. But I find that most people who I ask on my podcast don't really have it, and maybe they've tried to, like, train it to some degree, but they typically are just like, it doesn't seem very common with a lot of my guests, but a couple of them do have it. So that's very interesting. It's the kind of a standard question I ask people. I'm curious about
Very
your.
fun.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No,
I was just going to say, a very fun thing you can do if you're like curious about fan sense that I show people is to just like hold your hand out like this in a way where your IRL and virtual hand are lining up, and then just sort of like touch your hand like this and look down, and it feels it feels a little weird. Like when you first do, you're like, oh yeah, that is my hand. It's funky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting concept. I think it's almost as interesting as the idea of being able to acknowledge someone as an entity. Like I think people, like we were saying before about people not seeing people here as people. So this idea, like, do you have any thoughts about how people perceive one another in terms of we're pretty limited in what we have to use to see one another, and though phantom sense isn't something that you always have, I think there is a way of recognizing another person's existence, whether it be through body language, through tone of voice, through just a general energy that they give off. Do you think that VRChat, or the virtual space in general, is perhaps lending itself to I suppose people finding new ways of perceiving people as other people? And I'm kind of like repeating myself in a lot of ways. I'm using the same words repeatedly, but what I mean is people perceiving one another as like energies, like seeing someone's soul, or having seeing someone as the energy that they give off into the world. Do you think that's something that is a real idea, or do you think it's something that's kind of out there, hokey, it doesn't really exist? But if you want me to explain a little bit more, I can try to. But do you have any thoughts or perceptions about like seeing people in VRChat differently than you maybe would in reality?
I will say, one thing that VRChat does really well in sort of like establishing someone's presence for you that a lot of other like online platforms and games don't, is that you have the ability to just exist very close to how you would IRL. Like let's say you play League of Legends with someone, right? You have your like online friends that you play League of Legends with, or any other like online game. There are a lot of cases where those people, those friends, only exist in that specific like situation. Like you may hop in a Discord call or something, but the majority of your interactions are through this one thing that you guys all do together. It's sort of like maybe this is a bad comparison, but it's almost like a coworker situation where you never see your coworker like outside of the workspace, and you kind of forget that they have like a whole life outside of there and everything. Or when you're younger and you don't realize that your teachers like are like real people that like have their own lives outside of like being your teacher, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas VRChat, like, even let's say I have people who I primarily hang out with them at clubs, right? There's so many different music events that I can run into them at, and when we're there, we're not doing like, we're always listening to music, we're like dancing, but we're also just sort of existing the way you normally would at a club a lot of the times. Like we can just sit down and like talk about life, tell jokes, like just be who we are. And I feel like being able to express yourself as just this like close to real life setting sort of cements like, oh yeah, this is my friend that I talk to. This isn't just like this random person that I play GTA Online with. This is someone who I am hanging out with on the weekends, who I am getting drinks with, or talking, or yada yada yada, right?
Mm-hmm. So would you say that the social dance that we do in reality is similar or different to how we socially function, or I like to say dance, in VRChat, based on your thinking?
I'd say so, yeah.
So you would say it's the same?
At least to me. Yeah, like there are different, there's different like social norms in here, I feel like. But in general, like once you actually like warm up to someone and are just chatting with them, that's still you. Like you're still being yourself. Whether you are that expressive, like, or whether you behave that same way in person is another thing, but you're still you. Like, I'm still me here sitting talking to you, right? Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I agree. And I think many people in VRChat, I would say more so the new people, may have a hard time seeing another person. I think reconciling the fact that is another person in front of you might be a little bit outlandish for a couple of people to understand. And it's not really until you kind of spend enough time here and interact with a fair amount of people that kind of becomes very clear. Or like you make a friend that like you end up keeping for the rest of your life, or that you connect with somebody on a spiritual level. Do you think those like those quote unquote spiritual connections are more easily attainable here because there are less boundaries and less limitations to creating an atmosphere or situations where we can actually like meet somebody and like actually like, wow, this person is extremely special. Like you just kind of innately know that just from like being in their presence. So do you think that's a thing that's easily expressed or experienced here in a virtual space, or something that is very commonly done IRL, would you say?
I think it depends. So like one of the benefits of socializing here is that typically, especially if you're at an event, you have something in common already, and there's already this sort of vibe where it's okay to just chat with people and hang out. And IRL, I feel like it is entirely dependent on where you are. Like, I don't know, if I were to go out to like a random Applebee's, I don't plan on like really making any friends there. But if I were to go to, let's say, like a queer club or a space where you are expected to be expressive and socialize with people, then I'd say, yeah, it's pretty similar. It's all about like what space you're in and what are the expectations of that space. Even within VRChat, like there are different places you can go to that have different norms as to how you act there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's just about like there is the overarching VRChat culture, and then there are subcultures, and then there are cultures within certain groups or friend groups. Yeah. So, yeah, very much the case for sure. Is VRChat a game or a social platform?
I view it sort of as more of a social platform, honestly. Like there are games in here, but I don't view VRChat itself as a game. I honestly kind of view it more as like a social media, in a sense.
Why is that?
At least for me, it's just because, I mean, the main thing that I do in here, I feel like, is socialize. And even the events that I host, like Star Party, I'm coming at this from at least partially from a socialization and a expression, like, point of view. Like, when I host Star Party, I'm hosting this, knowing that I want people to be able to hang out. I want people to be able to socialize. Even at events where, let's say you go to an event where it's typically more quiet and not as much talking. Even those, like, I feel like there's still the aspect of I'm experiencing this with other people. This isn't just like a one-off thing that I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the idea of an experience is, I think that's, like, I think there are layers of VRChat that you go through, and it's not really kind of an upward climb, it's more of like a downward downward kind of digging, like you're digging into the underground of VRChat, like where all the people who are having experiences kind of exist, and then there are like layers between, you know, just being a mirror dweller or just, you know, wearing a meme avatar and hanging out and drinking night. Like obviously those things are things that, you know, people who are still like in the underground still do, but I think that as you continue to move down and understand the cultural nuances of VRChat, you start to find that there are layers there as a community that exist, and getting to that point of having an experience isn't something that is initially like well-founded, I think, by most newcomers in VRChat. I don't think that's how you felt. I don't think that's how I felt. You kind of learn that over time, I would say.
Right.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts about VR as a technology that we're essentially all the guinea pigs for? We are basically the ones who are I wouldn't say we're basically testing out. We're the testing bed of humanity at this point, of people who are using VR in a significantly social, more exceedingly social way than I think people anticipated. And VR seems to be largely centered around social experiences. So what are your hopes and what are your beliefs about VR as a platform, as a technology in the next years? And is there anything that you would like to see?
I really hope, and you know, this is a very common sentiment and one that's easier said than done, but I would really like to see VR just become more accessible to like the wider audiences. Like, when you think about it, as we currently use VR compared to other technologies out there in the world, it kind of sucks. But like, we like, if you think about like, okay, there's so many layers I have to do, right? Like, I have my Quest headset that I'm on right now, and then I have like the whole link cable system that I'm running. And then that has to go through like the Quest link into like Steam VR, and then Steam VR, I have to boot like these other programs. I use like a place-based calibrator to get like my full body tracking working, and I do this like XS overlay and yada yada yada. There's so many like things that you have to like set up, I feel like, and if one of those crashes, it's like, okay, well now
everything
I have to,
comes
like,
tumbling down.
VRChat's like one of the only places where like I could be like having drinks at 2 a.m. on a Saturday night, and at the same time I'm listening to music, talking with people, and trying to like troubleshoot like a tech problem at the same time. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's so weird. It like, and I feel like, you know, understandably, a lot of people who aren't in VR don't want to deal with that. We're fine with it, and we're also used to it. I don't mind doing it, but that's not everyone. And I feel like that was part of the appeal of like stuff like the Oculus Quest, of like, here, just take this thing, just turn it on, there you go. But then you also, of course, have the topics of like, okay, well, what if I want to connect this to PC VR? PC VR is like where a lot of the like more like immersive and detailed experiences are, yada yada. But that initial appeal, I feel like, speaks to the need for accessibility in the space, of just having something that reliably works, that you can just get your hands on, and you don't have to like troubleshoot stuff or like run this like command line or something to make sure something works, etc.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it really is. Like, when you think about how computing was back in the day, it really does feel like we've definitely come a long way, but there, like you said, there is still an immense amount of setup that goes into even just getting into VR in the first place, and you have to take the time to learn those things, and there may not be enough motivation at that time to really do that, which is also like another layer of just boundaries that exist in the VR space. So yeah, improving accessibility, simplifying the process, of getting all set up, especially simplifying full body, which I imagine, and full body, and also with face tracking becoming an emerging technology that's really kind of it's becoming a very, very popular, very, very fast, but only for like the first adopters in this space. But VRChat is very much the testing bed for a lot of up and coming technologies, which I think will benefit VRChat in the long run. But it's still, I think it's a long way out. So how far do you think we are from perhaps getting to a point where we get to Ready Player One type status, or I don't know how familiar you are with anime, but Sword Art Online, I always kind of bring that up, and everyone just kind of like, oh yeah, I know that kind of thing. Or even like Black Mirror type things, where we can understand the brain to such a degree that we can just kind of turn off a switch and just kind of integrate into like the technology just kind of does it all on its own type of thing. Like, do you think that's possible? Do you think that's all science fiction? Or do you think we'll be wearing toasters on our head for the rest of our lives?
I think, like, I'm not going to say, never say never, right? I don't say it's, like, impossible, but I personally would not count on seeing Sword Art Online, at least in my lifetime. Just because, you can have stuff like VR, like treadmills and like haptic vests and like really nice clear headsets and hand tracking and face tracking, but to actually fully replicate like your whole being into a virtual space, I think we're like very, very far away from that. Not just in a technology standpoint, but also like in an ethics standpoint, and trying to get people to warm up to that, and then also prove that that's like a safe technology, and then also so many things. Like, unfortunate, but I'm not counting on seeing Sword Art Online anytime soon.
That's fair. All right. So we've talked about we've talked about VR and VRChat and your experiences there. So let's talk about what you do, which is Star Party. So I think we can start there. So why did you end up creating Star Party? What was the impetus for making that an event of your own?
So Star Party has a few different like personal purposes that I wanted to do. So one of them, starting out, was I was like, I want to sort of contribute to the same feeling that I had, that other people gave me when I entered this space, of having a place that you can go to that makes you feel welcome, that makes you feel safe, that makes you feel like you can just relax and express yourself with like-minded people. I was like, I just want to add back to that and keep putting that energy out there. This space gave that to me. I want to continue giving it to other people and create a place where people can just be happy and express themselves and enjoy their night. More so than that, I also wanted to just, I wanted to have a extension of myself, essentially, to have almost as like a thank you, I guess, for the experiences that this platform has given me. I genuinely owe so much of my life and my current like healthier mental state to VRChat. And so this is sort of like me like saying thank you. I have this back. I hope I can make someone feel as welcome as I felt when I first came here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And when did you start Star Party?
Star Party started little over a year ago on May 4th. I remember that because our anniversary, our birth date is May 4th, Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you. Very
yeah.
fitting.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Very, very fitting, I would say, for sure. Was that planned or just kind of something that just happened?
Completely coincidental.
Wow. Okay. Gotcha. And what sets Star Party apart from any other event? Because I'm sure you've been to no shortage of a variety of events over the years of being in VRChat. So, what sets Star Party apart from everything else?
Well, I won't say that there's nothing else like what I'm about to describe, but I did want to see more events where there wasn't such a focus on like going hard, like as loud and fast as possible. I wanted there to also be more spaces where you can just sort of relax and like you can lay back, you can chill, you can take a nap if you want to, even like spaces where it's okay to just socialize and relax and not have to go so hard. Like I like to think of Star Party as like a very good like introductory music event to someone who may not be used to going to music events in VR.
I would. That's interesting that you would say it would be more introductory because I've been to a variety of events myself, just like you have, and I would imagine that people who are new to VRChat or just new to the scene in general, I imagine that they would be the first to have their mic up to 100 and to be talking and yelling and making jokes. Like being just not aware of the room, incapable of reading the room. I think those people are the more likely ones to cause a ruckus and have to be like, hey, can you not see that this is what's going on here type of thing. So it's interesting that you would say that it would be introductory. Like how do you reconcile that at all?
I was sort of going off of how my personal friends, like IRL, how they reacted to me bringing them here. Because I have like shown a number of my IRL friends, like outside of VRChat, like the space and like what I do here and everything. Like it's not like a secret or anything like that. And something I noticed when I would bring them to large music events is they had this sort of like culture shock where they're like, oh my god, there's so many people, the like everything's loud, there's a lot of people talking. They're like, oh fuck, you're the only person I know here, what do I do? Like there's a lot of stuff happening at once, which if you're like already like a club goer or something like that, that's probably not as big of a deal for you. But at least in my experience, going to a very large music event can be kind of a culture shock and like a sensory overload to people who aren't really used to the space.
Gotcha. So you mean people who are not really aware of VRChat's culture from that, maybe like from the outside, that people who already know, not exactly people who are new to VRChat in general, would you say?
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. So, let's just talk about that. How do you deal with those sorts of people? Like, how do you kind of keep the event open and friendly, while dealing with people who ultimately just kind of maybe don't understand the culture, who may just maybe like, I don't know, they may be there with a friend who invited them, and their friend is too scared to just say, hey, like we can't talk right now, kind of thing. Like I guess how does that, like how do you as the creator of the event, I guess deal with those situations at your event, if they even arise?
It depends. Yeah, thankfully they seem to be like pretty few, but when they do happen, it depends on what the situation is. Like if someone's just being like kind of annoying, like let's say there's like someone that's just like being loud or whatever in someone's face or something like that, a simple just like, hey, sorry, could you like tone it down a little, like that tends to be enough. Or if someone's in like a very obtrusive avatar and it's like blocking people's view or like breaking their immersion or something, or sending off a bunch of light particles. Honestly, most of the time when I come up to them and just ask like, hey, can you like change into something different? They're like, oh yeah, I gotcha. The only times I am a little bit more harsh and receive more pushback is usually when it's someone who it was malicious from the start. We haven't had too many of these, but we have had people who come in and they're like, they'll try like pestering the DJ, or they'll say something rude to an attendee, and if I don't hear it immediately, someone will come up to me and just be like, hey Sushi, these guys over there are causing a problem doing XYZ. I'll go over to them and I'll just say like, hey, what's happening? And typically, even though I give them a chance to explain themselves, they still react very hostile to me, and that kind of just reinforces like, okay, bye.
Right. And because VRChat has put in better tools to just remove people from instances, and it doesn't even have to be the person who create the instance to be able to remove people these days. So that's good. Being able to keep instances more exclusive and safe for everybody else, without distractions or just people who want to cause chaos. I think that makes sense to me, honestly. Like, what is the most difficult aspect of starting an event from nothing in VRChat?
I would say the most difficult part is probably consistency in the beginning. I think consistency is probably one of the most important things that would lead to an event's success. Of just, every like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever night, there is this event that happens, and this is the kind of vibe it is. This is what you can expect, and just having that on a regular basis is really helpful for an event like getting off the ground. And I feel like if you are just starting out, it can be really hard to keep that going and keep that energy going. So like, when you just start an event, you may not have like that many people at first, and that may discourage you, or maybe you're just not used to hosting something like this in general, and it can be hard for you to get used to regularly devoting like a part of your schedule to this new thing that you do. And I think just sticking with it and learning how to keep it going and how to keep it running efficiently at first is the hardest part.
Mm-hmm. And what is your process for preparing for a weekly event? Like, this is a weekly event that you run. So how do you maintain that momentum? And what is your process for getting everything together so that you're ensuring that your event is run smoothly and is as successful as it can be?
I do have a little bit of leeway. It's only every other week, so it's
my
not
bad.
a week-to-week basis.
I couldn't it seemed like it was like weekly, like when I looked into it, but yeah, I got you.
You're good. Yeah, no, like, I think, so what I do is, one, I try, and this is more of a in the long run thing, I try to first just maintain a very welcoming and positive like culture at the event. I feel like just having this like sort of sub community, I guess, within the music scene, that they know the vibe, they know what the event is about. Like they're good people, they get along well with others. Like just having like a good community behind you, I feel like helps a lot, because that's going to be a lot of people's first impressions when they come in. And so seeing that as your first impression of the event, I feel like can really help just set the tone for like what you should be expecting, or how you should be like interacting with this event. Other than that, I try to set up lineups and everything in advance, so I'm not just like panicking last second trying to get a lineup. I try to have at least like the next few star parties planned out, or at least like the next two bare minimum, just so that I'm not like scrambling at the last minute, or if someone drops, I can easily fill it in.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything more to setting up the event, like world choice, VRCDN type things? Is there anything else that you need to do as the creator to make sure that everything is running well?
So VRCDN, most of the DJs will have their own link that I just grab from them in our we have like a little organizational group chat that I'll make for like each event. And most people have their own VRCDN link, or a Twitch link will suffice too. I also have a VRCDN, of course, and if someone needs like a guest key, I provide that to them. I basically just try and make sure like, hey, is there anything that you guys need as the performers that I can try and like help you with? Do you need a guest key? Do you have like a schedule that I should be aware about? Like that's another thing I ask is, is there a time zone difference that I need to be aware of? Is there do you have like a tough work schedule or school or something like that? Like, how can I make this go as smoothly for the performers as I can? Because I feel like, if the performers are stressed, or if the performers are not having a good time, or they're running like super like it's like, oh, I have work at this time, and like right after I get off from work I have to really quickly run to play for Star Party. I try to avoid instances like that, just because the more of those pop up for your performers, like, one, you don't want them to feel bad, you don't want them to feel stressed, but also like it increases the chance of something going wrong. Like if they were already like on a tight schedule and you're really pushing it, you're just increasing the likelihood that they may come late, or may get caught up in something. Maybe they have traffic on the way home, maybe something comes up, I don't know. But just making sure that however they're set up and whatever time slot they have is the easiest for them, I feel like helps a lot.
Got you. Do you remember what your first Star Party ended up like?
Yes, I remember the very first actual event we did. We had like a small pop-up like randomly first, just to like kind of stress test things and see how the world worked with more than just two people, me and Gross, the world dev, just to see how it worked with like more than just us in there. And then we had our like grand opening, and I remember, oh man, a lot of people came out from that, which was very encouraging. I remember talking with a lot of people throughout the event and getting remarks like, oh, this reminds me of when I used to like stargaze as a kid, or this just feels like so nice and like open. And hearing those comments just reassured me that I was on a good path with this event, and seeing how people reacted to it.
Mm-hmm. And what was how have, if at all, how have things changed or evolved with the event as a whole from that first event to how you run it now? Is there anything different that you do? Anything that's improved or been taken away from back then?
Not too much, honestly. I started doing more variety in the posters, for one. I remember I used to have this sort of basic poster template that I made, and I would just sort of make slight variations of that same like template that I created for all the different events. And then there was one night I booked a friend, and they were like, quick question, is this going to have the same template as before? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, You should change that up. You should get spicy with it. You should like get creative with it. Like, don't just do like the same template. And I was like, you know what, you're right, I'm gonna lock in. That's my bad. And so I started trying to push myself to get better at poster creation and graphic design, which has ended up becoming like a whole other thing for me.
Okay. So you just kind of you already had like initial skills in graphic design, but you're just like you were simplifying the process. I think streamlining the creative process in that regard there's nothing wrong with that. It definitely takes time to make these sorts of things. So I was actually going to ask you like how well has marketing gone for you? Like I know you've been in the scene for quite some time. How well has marketing done for you? It seemed like you had a pretty good turnout for the first event, and has it always been the case? Has that continued?
I mean, so I remember the first event, like the grand opening, had a really good turnout. After that, it sort of dipped a little bit, just because new event, everyone wants to see it, of course, and then the people who really fuck with it will stay there, and then it's a matter of just expanding that core group of people who very specifically fuck with this specific event that you're doing. In terms of I don't really like to think of it as marketing, but I guess I've really just been keeping it consistent. I make my posts on my social media about it, and I make sure to send those out. But for the most part, it's just keep doing it consistently. I feel like has been the biggest push for getting people to Star Party.
Okay. And Okay. I did want to ask you about being in the music scene and starting your own event. The idea of starting your own event can be very, very daunting, I think, for a lot of people. And I wonder, I'm curious from your perspective, is there a certain level of experience or notoriety that one needs to have before daring to create an event that ultimately is meant to contribute to the scene? Do you think it's necessary to just know people, or to what degree is it important to know people in order to potentially have a successful event? How contingent is your place in the scene weigh on your success, your overall success with whatever event you may want to create?
I feel like there is definitely importance to just having people at least be familiar with what you do, to getting people to come to your event and start something new. Just because if let's say it's your first day in VRChat and you just want to pump an event out, right? Aside from maybe the people you booked, they may bring people in, but if it's your first time and people aren't really familiar with who you are or the kind of work that you do, a lot of times it's one, how are they even going to find out about you? If you kind of just show up here, people don't really know who you are, and they aren't really looking out for anything you might be doing. So you have to have some kind of social presence in here. I feel at least you don't have to be ultra mega popular or anything, but at least have people be oh yeah, that's so and so. I see them around.
Okay. About how long do you think, if there's any way of if there's any way of I guess, what's the word, creating a length of time that we would say about how long should one exist in VRChat before considering and in the scene more or less to consider making event, if you can even put a number on that?
I'd say the time can vary depending on just how social you are and how much of your free time you decide to spend in VRChat. But I think the main thing to sort of keep a track on is is how well do you understand the scene itself and like how it operates. You know, as we were talking about before, there are social norms in here, and there's different like there's a way into how the whole community runs and works, be it from like, you know, we have like VRCDN, we have the VRC.tl, we have like different like how we engage via like Discord or like social media. We have like, you know, the different time zones and when they're active and everything, and just all these little things that go into how we end up spending our days and nights together. I think just understanding that and understanding how the general like culture of the scene is more important than a lot of things when it comes to just starting an event here. Like, if you want to exist among all these other events, you first have to understand why and how do those events exist in the first place, right?
Of course. So, what would be your best word of advice for someone who is looking to start their own event in VRChat?
Best word of advice I can give is honestly just like kind of throw yourself at it. I feel like a lot of people get cold feet and get too caught up in thinking of like, oh, like, is this right? What's the right vibe? And yeah, of course you should put some thought into that, but don't sit on it forever, right? Don't be afraid to just put it out there, and who knows, maybe your first event doesn't go well, right? Maybe you throw your first event and it doesn't meet expectations and you're like, oh man, I wish this went better. Well, now you can look at that and think like, okay, well, what can I improve upon? And the more you gain that kind of knowledge, I think the sooner you can just keep going with it.
Mm-hmm. And how would you describe the vibe of Star Party, and how, like, what can someone who maybe has never been to a music event before, what can they expect to what kind of music can they expect from Star Party, and I guess like how, like, I guess what's the vibe, what kind of music, and just kind of the breakdown of how things typically go at an event.
The sort of vibe of Star Party is very specific, one that I thought of. So very specifically, I wanted Star Party to feel like a warm hug when you really need it. And that is what I tried to accomplish with the event. And I can only hope that the people attending feel the same way.
And about how long does it last?
It lasts about 4 hours or so.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of genre of music can they expect to? What genres do you typically like to feature at Star Party?
It's typically stuff that's a little bit more on the chill side, but I don't really have like a specific genre requirement. The way I book people is I tell them specifically, quote, play whatever you would personally imagine listening to while looking up at the night sky. The way I book people is I book people with a similar just vibe about them. And so the reason I do that is because people with a similar vibe, I imagine, would have similar interpretations or complementing interpretations of that prompt, of that suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
So stuff like, I mean, we've had like shoegaze, we've had hip hop, we've had witch house, we've had trance, we've had like jungle, D&B, all on the more like, you know, laid back side of their variants, but we still have like a wide variety of stuff. You can hear anything from classical to lo-fi to techno. It's really down to the artist's interpretation and how they want to present themselves.
Mm-hmm. And how much information, I mean, do you have any idea? I know it sounds like you give the DJs freedom to do whatever they want. I imagine the VJs work with the DJs, so that's not really something you have to worry about anyway. But with regards to just, booking DJs and doing a certain kind of lineup, if you allow for so much freedom, how do you kind of are you aiming to create a specific kind of energy by let's say bringing on certain DJs for each event, or are you just simply like trusting that they will just abide by the overarching vision of Star Party and whatever the music and the vibe is, that it just should align with that? Like, do you try to like set up DJs and line them up to kind of create a certain kind of story, or just like from like maybe someone be a little bit harder to like a little bit softer, or a little bit softer to a little bit harder, anything of that nature? Does that go into your thinking or process of booking?
Not really, honestly. I know there are plenty of events that try to like really structure their lineups and how the night progresses, and there is like a very good merit to doing that. I can see like the appeal in that. For me personally, I honestly just structure the lineup like by convenience. Like once I have all the DJs confirmed that they all are good to play for this night, I bring them to the group chat, I give them time slots, and I say, tell me what is just most convenient for you. It's not like a first come first serve sort of thing. It's just everyone tell me what's most convenient for you. Like if there's like some schedule conflict or whatever, just let me know and we can structure it from there. I don't really put any emphasis on like, oh, the first person has to have this kind of vibe and the closing act should have this kind of vibe. It's really just like what works best for everyone.
Gotcha. All right, that makes perfect sense. Okay, thank you so much for talking about your event. I think we covered a lot of the core details of like how people can approach the event and be a part of that and what they can expect, which I think is really, really important for sure. But what about DJing? We can talk about your DJing experience, if that's cool.
Ooh. Yeah.
All right. So how did you? I think everyone has their own story. Some may be similar, but how did you realize that you wanted to be a DJ? Where did that come from?
Well, I had an interest in music in general prior to this. Outside of electronic stuff, I also play piano as well. I've played piano since I was really little, and so I always had like a love for just music and playing music and performing. When I was like, I want to say like late teens or so, maybe around like high school or like maybe early 20s, I did like sort of dip my toe into like EDM production, but I didn't really have anyone to turn to for help or advice in that. Like I would open up FL Studio and be like, cool, I made this like little techno beat here. Who do I talk to about this? Like at the time there also like wasn't as much documentation specifically for the kind of stuff that I wanted to do. And none of my other friends were doing like electronic music production, at least just like in my specific social circle. So it kind of just fizzled and died out. And then when I found VRChat, I saw so many people DJing, and I had so many friends who DJ'd and like produced music and hosted events that I felt very comfortable in giving it a shot. I talked with some close friends, and I was recommended like some cheap entry-level decks, and I saw one for, I think it was like, my first deck was like a DDJ Rev 1. I think it was about like $200 or so, like around the cost of like a Nintendo Switch or something. And I remember thinking, like, okay, let's give this a shot. Like, it's not an eye-watering amount of money, at least. So worst case scenario, if it doesn't work out, I can sell it for half off or something and just be like, okay, well, I tried. Like, the just getting into it was very like accessible to me, and I had plenty of people I could go to and be like, hey, how do I do this? What does this mean? Etc. Like, I think having like a friend group and community to turn to for help was a big factor in it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how did you kind of, I would say, how did you determine what kind of DJ you wanted to be? Because, I think people who are into music, I think the average person has a lot of genres that they personally care for. How did you settle on, if at all? I'm not sure exactly how vast your repertoire is for DJing, but I imagine when you're first starting out, you want to really focus and not be all over the place. So how did you kind of focus on what it is that you wanted to do, like initially, and then kind of evolve yourself from there?
So initially, the first genre that I started out was with Witch House. I enjoyed the genre. I also had like other friends who enjoyed Witch House as well, and it was something that I enjoyed listening to that I didn't hear being played very often, and so I was like, well, anyone can start doing a thing here in VRChat. I want to play more of this genre that I don't hear played a lot. And so I started with Witch House. Witch House is a genre also structurally, at least the specific kind that I was playing, there were a lot of like parts in the songs that were very forgiving for me to transition in and out of. So it wasn't as like grating as some other genres that I tried. Of course, then I also got into other variants of Witch House, which were much, much harder to do. But I think just having a library of music specifically that is very forgiving to you at first is great for starting out. Something that is easy to get into, but has like a high skill ceiling if you want to just keep going at it, make it as complex as you want. Then after that, honestly, I never really settled on like one genre specifically. I play a lot of like breakbeat and like hyperpop, but generally I decide on just what kind of music am I listening to this week, and I just go with that.
Well, yeah, I mean that's definitely like you've essentially had to build a skill set to be comfortable to float around through different genres. And how long have you been? Yeah, how long have you been DJing for, and how long did it take you to get comfortable with just kind of moving through genre to genre?
I want to say now a little over 2 years. Actually, it may have been 3. It might be 3 years now. I think first year, just learning how the software works and the terminology that people use was the biggest like learning curve or step in learning how to DJ. But after that, it was kind of just like feeling the music, listening to it like more intently, figuring out how it is set up structurally, and thinking, oh, this sounds like a good part of the track, or I could do this, or I think these two songs like sound like a very similar key. I think they would mash very well together, etc., etc.
Okay. And so with DJing, what, in your opinion, well, we'll start with this. How do you go about creating a library of songs to DJ? And I know for once you start to get into it, having high quality versions of songs is very, very important, since you may be running through your set through, VRCDN, which is also run through your computer, which is then put out into VRChat or any other location. So the quality of the music there's going to be some degradation with the quality of music. So getting high quality versions of songs is very, very necessary. So how do you go about building your library of music, and how has that kind of changed over time?
So at first, I was kind of just going off of whatever music I already had like listening to on like my Spotify, or just like random files I had, and I would try and find more of that via like YouTube or just like from friend suggestions. What really started kicking off for me was just SoundCloud digging, honestly. Like, I think that's what a lot of DJs do, is just dig through SoundCloud. You find a track that you really enjoy and you go, I want more of this, and you go to like related tracks, or like you go to the artist and go through their likes or something, or see what else they're posting or what other artists they're following, and you just keep this like rabbit hole going from there of like, was this artist like? Oh, they like this artist. Was that artist like? Oh, they like this artist. I like this song. What's similar to that song? Oh, that song's cool. What's similar to that song? And you just keep going until you have like 100 tracks or so, and you're like, all right, cool.
Okay. Do you think that VRChat's music scene as it currently exists has become an extension of the IRL underground scene?
I would say to an extent. It depends. Like, there's definitely more people who are at least aware that there is like a music scene in VRChat, and those people, they're from like all levels of the music scene. Like, there are people who go to underground raves that know what VRChat is, and they know that there is a scene here, even if they've never, engaged with it. There are also people who, who are higher up at different like record labels or groups or collectives that also know about VRChat. There's a lot of people at various points in the music industry that are aware of the VRChat music scene and have various opinions on it. Although in general, I do think it is more of an extension of the underground scene due to the similarities in their cultures, like I was saying before, of like the underground scene IRL is typically built out of like creating a expressive place that is a little bit more free away from the hardline rules of the industry. And I feel like that same mentality is also what drives a lot of people in here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sense of creative freedom to just try whatever they want. Let me ask you, like, how do you go about preparing for a set?
So whenever I am booked to play an event, first it depends on like what event I'm playing for. Let's say I am booked to play for like a techno event. It's like, okay, I'm going to go and build something techno-wise. Really, how I get started with it is I try and figure out, okay, what's a good opening track? And I just listen to music like as I go about my day while I'm driving or doing errands or whatever. I just listen to music, and I just get in my head of like, ooh, this would be like really cool to like open a set to. And then I just take that song and I just build off of there. I just keep going from how that song feels into whatever the rest of the set might be. I try to put like planning into most of the sets that I do, but sometimes also it's fun to just freestyle it and be in the moment as well.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other methodologies that you use aside from just picking the songs? Is there like just skills that you had to pick up along the way? Any sort of effects that maybe you add? Like, you can go into kind of the nitty gritty of it, but yeah, it's in terms like the entirety of from like start to finish, like how do you like what about even visuals to some degree? Like, how does it all go into whatever set you may be aiming to do?
So for visuals, I usually have like one of a few like set loops that I have depending on the vibe of the set. For instance, I have these really nice visuals I commissioned from my friend Sir Rose that I absolutely love, and they're very like flashy, pow, like catchy, like smooth, like very like bam, bam, bam kind of visuals. And I love using those for harder sets, like when I play breakbeat, techno, ones that really go with like that sort of like pa, pa, pa kind of energy. Whereas I have these other visuals that are very, they're a lot more like cutesy. They're just like my name and like the trans flag colors, and they have like a bunch of like pixelated games in the background that I recorded, and just have gameplay of those going on in the back behind my logo. I like using that for like when I play like more bubbly, like fun, bouncy around kind of stuff. It depends on you know, just what is the vibe of the set, and then I usually choose my visuals off of that.
Mm-hmm. So
as for like,
wait, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No. Go ahead. Finish.
I was just saying, as for like the actual like structure of how I like mix songs together, it usually goes by like just what's the vibe of the track, and how is there like a creative way that I can blend these two together or get from one to the other. Like let's see, what was it? Recently I played a set, and this may sound like kind of cheesy. There was this song by Netrunner that I was playing, and there is a vocal in there where the singer, she goes, "Listen, you hear that?" Which also happens to be the hook for another song, Rumble by Skrillex, where it's like, "Oh, listen, you hear that? Killers in the jungle." Da, 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 da. And I was like, "Oh, that's like the same hook." And so I would just take the initial hook from the Netrunner track and then just sort of like cut in the vocals of the Skrillex track, and then it's like, oh, it's now like the vocals are like complementing each other. They're like speaking to each other in a sense, and I can work that into it, and just seeing like, you know, what complements how can these songs sort of like clash together in a way that just feels nice and feels right and feels how I want to, just matches the energy that I want to project out in the set.
Okay. Yeah. And what word of advice, like we'll say, instead of word of advice, what is one particular strategy that you would recommend that someone keep in mind when DJing? And I also kind of want to ask, like what's one technique that you would say for someone to keep in mind, and how do you perceive DJing overall? Like, I think some people may think it's just people throwing music into a machine and it just kind of does the thing. I guess, how would you kind of suggest someone like grow into building a certain kind of technique, since it is DJing is meant to be pretty active overall, but I think some people may perceive it as something, oh, anybody can do it, or like anybody can get into DJing type of thing. So how would you kind of, like, I guess, answer, what would be your response to anyone can get into DJing, and how would you suggest a person who may be new or considering it to get into the craft?
Honestly, I would say yes, actually, anyone can get into DJing, but there's like a little asterisk there. So whenever I recommend DJing to people as a activity or just a skill set, the way I pitch it is something that has a, typically low skill, like, entry point, but a very high skill ceiling. I think if you want to just start getting into DJing, doing the basics of like, get from one song to the next, I think it's very easy to get into that. And so it's very forgiving. And that's one of the things that I enjoy about like pitching DJing to people as an activity, is like, it is very easy to get into. However, it can also be as complicated as you want. you can find plenty of videos online of people doing stuff that I couldn't do in a million years. Like the amount of coordination it takes for some DJs to do the things that they do is just it boggles my mind sometimes. But I think that's kind of what makes DJing so special as like a form of musical expression, is that it is something that is easy to get into, but so wide and vast in what you can do with it that you can just have so many different ways of DJing and so many different styles and so many different approaches to how you want to do it, that I think that's just what makes it so special. Like for me, the way I approach DJing is I try and think of it as less playing songs out and more layering different sounds together is how I approach it.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Like I think it's always super interesting to talk to people who are in the music scene. Like every time I go to a music event, as an outsider myself, I hope to not be one for much longer. But I think it's always really interesting to talk to people like yourself who are just very, very passionate about the scene, because I think that the music scene in VRChat is probably one of the largest, I would say, which is kind of weird because of how young the scene actually is, because of how technology has just made it's eased the entry point to DJing into VRChat. So I would say, considering like many other scenes that exist in VRChat, I would say that's one of the largest, but also still quite young. I think that's pretty agreeable. Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm not completely off of my rocker here. Great. Good to know.
No, you're right. Like, it is very large for, especially how young it is too. And it's large by, of course it's large by VRChat standards. We, in the grand scheme of things, we are still a very niche, small community. Like, it's debatable as to like if we're even like the total amount of people in like the music scene, however you want to like classify what counts as part of the music scene and what doesn't. It's debatable if we're even past like the 15K mark, let's say, for the amount of people. Like some people hearing me say that might even think that that's pushing it, that might be like too much. Like it may be closer to like 10,000 or maybe even less than that. Like we are definitely like a niche little bubble on the internet.
Yeah. I have a couple more questions for you that I'd like to run by you.
Sure.
Where would you like to be in 2 years?
In 2 years, where would I like to be? Preferably not in Texas.
Yeah. That's fair.
Yeah, I ideally in 2 years I would like to be somewhere where the climate is a little bit more trans-friendly. I know that's sort of like a bit more of a serious answer, but that's sort of the main thing on my mind recently of like, where am I going to, like, what direction am I going to start aiming my life towards? Like, how am I going to start, like, moving forward in life is, how easy is it for me to exist as a trans person in wherever place I'm at.
So in 2 years, well, when I say where would you like to be, and I don't exactly mean location-wise. That's good to know, but is there anything else that you would like to be in terms of your life, your existence and your goals? Anything particular you'd like to be at in that period of time?
I'd like to be producing more. I've given the old like college try many times at producing music, but I never end up with something that I feel satisfied with enough to actually release and put out. I know I just gave like a whole spiel earlier about if you want to run an event, just do it, just go for it, it's okay, just put it out there, and I should really follow my own advice on that. But in the next 2 years I would like to become more confident and comfortable with my music production ability, and actually just put something out, even if it's like basic and it sucks and it's like mid as hell. I would like to just, be more comfortable with just throwing stuff out there regardless of what it is.
And if you could give any manner of encouraging words / advice to anyone who may be listening or tuning in, it could be about anything. It doesn't have to be about anything that we've talked about. It could be about something that we haven't even touched on tonight. If there's one word of advice or word of encouragement you want to give to anyone who may be listening, what would that be?
Do whatever it takes to live as your most free, authentic self. This isn't just a trans thing or even just like a queer thing, but I feel like in general, it can be very hard for people to be comfortable with fully and freely expressing themselves. And I think that if I can give one piece of advice to anyone listening right now, it is to keep pursuing that. Don't worry about looking weird. Don't worry about being cringe or whatever. Just keep being yourself, and eventually the people who appreciate that and the people who love that will surround you.
All right. I love that word of advice. That's great. So where can people find you?
You can find me on Blue Sky at SushiFerret or on SoundCloud at SushiFerret. There is a Twitter, but it is It is not really active right now. It's there, but nothing ever gets posted anymore.
Okay. All right. That was pretty short and sweet. Awesome. And for people who may be wondering about where you can find me, now that you know where to find Sushi, if you're listening to this right now live, thanks for listening live. You can find me on YouTube at Nepherti with one I. Or if you're watching this on YouTube right now, thanks for tuning in on YouTube. You can absolutely find me live on Twitch and see these podcasts live at Twitch at Nepherti with two I's. And also you can catch me on Twitter at Nepherti with two I's. If you want more information about the podcast as well, you can find out more about the podcast at Sweet Talking Pod, also on Twitter. Or if you prefer the Blue Sky site, you can find me on Blue Sky also, where I generally just post very basic information about the podcast there. I'm not really posting very much there at the moment, just really letting people know about the podcast there as well. So you can find me on Blue Sky at Nepherti with one I. So, yeah. And for those of you who are tuning in now, I want to thank everyone for being a part of tonight's podcast, for listening in, and close out our live recording of this episode by thank you so much for collaborating with me. This is very much a collaborative effort. I'm very grateful to everyone who takes the time to join me, and I really can't do these without people being willing to give me a chance and actually be willing to sit down and talk with me and believe in what I'm trying to create here. So I really do appreciate you taking the time.
Of course, yeah. No, thank you for having me on here. It's been great, like really.
I'm very happy to hear that. I really do my best to make these as quality and as worth listening to and watching as possible. So thank you again for that. And thank you to everyone who has been tuning in to this episode of the Sweet Talking Podcast, episode 57, with me, Nepherti, and my wonderful guest, SushiFerret. Be sure to follow them wherever you can find them on Blue Sky and on SoundCloud. Be sure to support them, support their work. Go support Star Party as well in VRChat. So thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope you guys will tune in to the next episode of the podcast. But until next time, please feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoyed tonight's episode. And every little bit does help. So thank you so much for being here, for listening in, and hope to see you again in the next one. Until then, take care. We'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye. Oh, yeah, you can say bye too. I know, like, it's not obvious, but yeah. Bye, guys.
Later.